Well, welcome to the Rational Egoist. As you can see, we've got quite the setup here because I'm interviewing a fellow podcaster, one who's far more successful at it than I am. He's had his podcast up and running for about, I think, 2 years. It's called Locked In with Ian Bick. The title, as you may have guessed, refers to people locked in prison because he did himself a little stint and got out, and he's quite the success now. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike, and thanks for coming on my show a few months ago, and I'm glad we got to sit down and do this, and you're always welcome to use my studio.
Awesome. So, Ian, before we get to the prison stuff, I want to know what was life for you like before prison. How did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
So I was born in New York City, and I grew up in Danbury, Connecticut. Good family, middle class. My dad was finishing up his career in the New York City public school system as an administrator and teacher, then retired and took on a side hustle full-time, which was catering. He was a private caterer and did private events and stuff. And then my mom was a paralegal. And then when she had me and my brother, who's 4 years younger, she stayed at home full-time and then eventually became a massage therapist. Middle class family vacations. We always had a dog, family game nights on the weekends. Got bullied a little bit, in elementary school. So I ended up going to a private Montessori school. It was like 4th through 8th grade in one classroom, 15 kids total for all those grades. And I made it to 6th grade there. It was like 4th through 6th grade I stayed. Then I went back to public school, to the public middle school, because I wanted to get acclimated back towards the public school setting, because Danbury High School is one of the largest in the state. So I didn't want to go right from 8th grade and a school with, 20 kids to the biggest high school in the state. I wanted to have some, public skills and whatnot. And I had seen the kids. I had a couple friends that went right from 8th grade to the public high school from Montessori school, and it was an adjustment for them. So we grew up never necessarily wanting for anything. We had everything, provided for us, but we were also taught about like working hard for what we wanted. It's not like we just got like the new Xbox or the new Wii right off. Like I would earn it. I would make a lemonade stand. I would hustle for it. I started a little candy business selling out of my back in middle school. My dad would drop me off with $20 for lunch money. And I would go to CVS next door and turn that into a couple $100 selling gum, energy drinks, candy, all that throughout the week. So I always had that work ethic instilled in me. I would help out my dad with catering. I loved to be a waiter and in the front of the house. And eventually I would gear towards the back of the house, like working in the kitchen and stuff. And I was just like a hardworking, like quirky kid, did summer theater camp. Whenever all my friends were playing sports, I did theater camp. I did a little like public, out of public school basketball and soccer. But I wasn't really into sports. I was always like a little chubby, nerdy kid. And then in high school, I did the musical theaters all 4 years, at the play every year. And so that was my life growing up. It was pretty normal, but I was raised to be independent. Montessori school certainly teaches you to be independent. It's an outward way of thinking. You're sitting on a carpet. There's no desks. There's like a bunny rabbit hopping around, and you're meant to think. It's not your traditional way of learning. So that raised my independence, and we lived in a gated Jewish community where you just come home when it's dark to check in, and then on the weekends we would stay out later past dark, and we'd play manhunt. We played paintball. We had golf carts. We went dirt biking, quad riding, played airsoft, and we lived on a lake, but there was no motorboats, so we would have like boat wars where we would shoot each other with water guns and balloons and everything like that. So that was kind of like my childhood growing up.
I'm fascinated that you attended a Montessori school. I read about Maria Montessori some 25 years ago, and I was intrigued right away. I thought it was an incredible method of teaching. And when I been doing the podcast, I was hoping to get an expert on, but it's so hard. Like many experts respond to me and come on the show. The Montessori people have not, but recently I was able to interview somebody who was a certified Montessori teacher. And I'm just curious, do you feel like the Montessori method helped you develop that independent thinking that ultimately turns you into an entrepreneur and now a successful podcast host?
I would say independence, yes. School-wise, it's kind of, they teach you very different than what the public school is teaching you. So it's very hard to adjust from say you're in 7th and 8th grade, the Montessori school academics are so different because the testing's different. What you're learning is a little bit more advanced. So it's hard, like you're almost like, I would put it this way, the public school system, at least at the time, didn't acknowledge what you're learning in the private school system because you'd still have to attend basic classes. It never transferred over, even though you might have been above that. And I guess eventually they would make it right with kids. If they saw they were, testing a high in Algebra 1, they would bump you to Algebra 2. For example, I took Spanish 1 my freshman year, but I was so advanced in Spanish because I had learned that being around my dad, kitchen workers, and also in Montessori school, that they bumped me to Spanish 3. So there would be those types of cases. I got to skip Spanish 2. But overall, like looking at it, I don't think I would send my kids to Montessori school because for what it makes up in independence, it takes away any aspect of the social elements that are so important, in middle school and high school. Maybe I would send my kid there in like elementary school, but you need those in middle school and high school.
So a couple of things that I draw from your whole story is you got bullied when you were young. You went to these other schools, the Montessori school, but you wanted to get back into the main school. How were you? Like, it seems like you were really craving social interactions. And at a young age, those social interactions maybe weren't the best if you're getting bullied. So more than just socially, though, I want to know how you were socially, but how were you as a kid growing up through your teenage years?
I mean, I loved to be the center of the stage, and I think that's why, in a way, bullying kind of gave me that because you're still the kid that's getting picked on and being stood out, so you kind of embrace that. And then eventually I would take like karate, and my dad would say, you just got to hit the bully, and it felt good to like be on the center when a fight broke out or something, even though you're the one getting picked on and teased. And even, in summer camp, I was always the one they dressed up as a girl because I played Milton Berle or, Ed Sullivan, and they put lipstick on me and the hair and all of that and the high heels. And I just loved being the center of the stage. That's just who I was. I embraced that. I was was not an athletic kid, and I was always like the odd one out, and I looked weird. And I think that's why it helps me to this day, because I'm this kid with the glasses and the rosy cheeks that you would never expect to go to prison, but I stand out like a needle in a haystack, So it's just interesting in that way.
In my experience, people don't just turn to crime out of nowhere. These habits and patterns of thinking have long been present. And you went to prison at what, 19 years old?
I was 21. I got indicted, though, when I was 19. I got arrested like on state charges when I was 18.
If somebody were to have followed you around with a video camera from when you were a little kid, somebody that's astute, would they have seen the signs that one day you would potentially end up in trouble with the law?
I think it would probably be noticed in middle school, and that had to do with authority. Like, I think the early signs were they passed like a backpack petition in school that you can wear backpacks. So I was a kid I was a leader. I started a backpack petition and I was getting suspended, in school suspension for wearing a backpack, trying to start like a riot and stuff over that. I would wear flip-flops when they banned flip-flops. Like, I hated being told what to do. So I think that was the early sign. And I bet you that transfers beyond my memory to when I was a kid and acted out when I didn't get my way and stuff like that. Everything had to be my way or the highway. And my parents and relatives would tell stories about how I would cry when I didn't get the food I wanted, or I needed to eat a certain thing. Like, my aunt always rips me for, she only had whole wheat bread in the house, and I demanded potato bread, or I was going on a food strike. So I think those might have been the early signs you're referring to, but I think it was definitely the most noticeable in middle school, just like going against the basic rules and systems,
So you had a problem with authority, and you also like to be the center of attention. So in the writings of the criminal psychologists that I learned the most from, Stanton Samanow and Samuel Yockelson, they identified 52 criminal thinking errors. Two of them one of them had to do with a problem with authority, being rebellious. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there's something in there about, always wanting to buck the system, buck the tide. And another one is sort of wanting to be the big shot, like, just like you said, to be the center of attention. So it doesn't surprise me, and I would bet there would be more if we could really delve into it. Maybe as we're talking, if I see any or hear you say something, I'll ask you about it. But you bought your own bar, right? Or you owned your own bar at 19 years old, right?
18, yeah, is when I took over my first club. But I started promoting at that club I would later own when I was 16. And I had my first corporate job when I was 16 too, booking events at this corporate center in Danbury. And they liked me because I would steal the business from other hotels and banquet centers that would normally get the proms. And because I was a VP in my class, I had certain pull to go to these, the presidents and vice presidents of other classes at other schools and say, hey, you should do your prom at this place. And I would get a commission off of that.
So you grow up, and you said middle class, but to be honest, it sounds like maybe upper middle class to me.
Yeah, I guess it depends. We didn't drive fancy cars or anything, and my dad had a good job that I think the money went to private schools, $10,000 a year for each kid,
Yeah.
So we had a successful job with the catering and stuff. But I had a lot more friends that had more money, than we did or did more things. And also I think a lot of people don't realize, my dad's side of the family was very wealthy, maybe not him per se, but his family were very famous and successful cardiologists. And their kids were the writer for The Simpsons and King of the Hill and The Office.
Oh, wow.
And so all of our big gifts that I got as a kid came from that side of the family, like the golf cart, my first car, things like that came from that side of the family.
So you come from a little bit of money. I'm not going to say you were super rich, but you weren't lacking for anything.
No, definitely.
At a young age, you're working in corporate America, you're booking, then you're running clubs, you had your own place when you're 18, 19 years old. You didn't need to commit crimes. You didn't need that kind of, the extra money. So as you're getting ready to start committing the crimes, what is your motivation? What's going through your mind?
I just wanted to be liked. I like being popular. I remember, going into high school, you're in one of the biggest high schools in the state, and you're as a freshman, even at freshmen are treated like dog shit to begin with. So you're a very small fish in a huge pond. And the kind of way I found my footing was doing the musical theater. That year, the year prior, the senior that usually threw the cast party with all the orchestra and the band members and the cast members with 300 kids had graduated, so they needed someone else to throw the cast party. And I agreed to throw the cast party. My parents said yes. We had a big property, and my dad had the connections to rent a tent and a dance floor and everything through catering. So that gave me popularity with the upperclassmen as a freshman because there were sophomores, juniors, and seniors in the play. So I started expanding my network, and that gave me such a high throwing an event like that and being known throughout the school, even though I was still a freshman. And from there, it kind of just continues to grow until I started my own party promotion business and everything like that. But I was always fueled. I was never fueled by money. Even to this day, I wouldn't say money. To this day, I'm fueled by making enough money to pay off the restitution and pay my bills. But I also like the growth of the podcast and getting more seen, which translates to being liked from when I was a kid. That addiction never really goes away. It's just you find a new containment for a new way to direct the energy. So back then, I just really wanted to be liked. I wanted to be popular. And doing the line of work that I did at that time gave me that.
So what exactly did you get arrested for?
So I ended up getting arrested for wire fraud and money laundering and then making a false statement. It was 15 federal counts. That was when I was 19. A lot of people don't realize that the nightclub in Danbury, Tuxedo Junction, had nothing to do with it. I was already under investigation by the time I started doing that, and then I ended up running and operating it during the investigation and during trial, and then ultimately up until the day, I got sentenced and my bond revoked and everything. Everything that took place was over a 6 or 7 month period of time in 2013 when I was a senior in high school, or I just graduated. I graduated a semester early. And it was that summer, 2013, I just turned 18. And the biggest thing that got me into trouble was not how I raised the money, but that I lied about the losses and continued to raise more money after that. all of my troubles came from lying and not being honest, which stemmed back to me not wanting to admit to my friends that, hey, you guys trusted me because I was super successful in high school, but then my first project fails miserably and I didn't want to be that failure. So I lied to cover it up. And once you tell one lie, it's an endless amount of lies until you make it right. And I never did that.
So you end up getting arrested. I want to know about the initial arrest, but more than that, the realization that you're going to prison. What's that like for you?
I didn't honestly never realize I was going to prison. I was so cocky and looking at other people's cases, seeing what other people got. You see like the Wolf of Wall Street only got 5 years for $100 million. And, he did it intentionally and set out to steal the money and was greedy and all of that. And I looked at all of those cases and saw like he served 2 years out of that 5 years. So no, I wasn't getting jail time. It wasn't until I was actually in the cell that first night after getting my bond revoked that I realized I could go to prison. And even then, I still didn't fully realize it because I thought the judge was just putting me in like a timeout for the 3 weeks between my bond getting revoked and sentencing. So I don't think it really hit me that I was going to prison until the judge reads 36 months. And in that moment, you're kind of like frozen because I was sitting there trying to figure out what 36 months meant because no one says months. At least the way I grew up, we say years, It's only until you get to prison when you realize everything's done by months.
36 months, I did 25 years. So a lot of guys in prison that are doing a lot of time will look at someone that's doing 36 months, for instance, and say, oh, that's nothing. But I know that whatever amount of time you have to spend in a cage is a lot of time. When I was 19, I was facing 9 months. And I remember thinking, I'll run. Like, I'm not going to jail for 9 months. There's no way I could handle that. So that 36 months to you must have just seemed like forever, I'd imagine.
The 21 days in holding between that felt like forever. It was the slowest time. And, looking back on it, I would say the first 3 months after getting sentenced were the longest period of time ever. But once you get past that, like, first year, like the last year, my sentence flew by. But that first year of it was dreadful, especially those first 3 months, and especially around the holidays. Like, I had gotten sentenced in October of 2016. I'm 21. I was only 21 for a few months by that point, and, the holidays are coming up. So I had to go through my first Thanksgiving and first Christmas, and that hit really hard. But I think what also helped me get through that time was the appeals, because I went to trial. I didn't take a plea deal. I was in so much denial all the way through a year later when I'm sitting in the SHU in Philadelphia hearing that my appeal got denied, and that's the end of it.
Just about everybody I know that's done time and lost a trial, and many people that didn't, goes through the same thing, myself included. People will say to me, how did you get through it? And what people don't grasp is, first of all, we can handle far more than what we think we can handle. But there's so many defense mechanisms that come into play. I'm going to win the appeal. I'm going to file a habeas corpus, and I'm going to get my time knocked down. If that doesn't work, I'm going to go for a sentence reduction. And just about everybody I know believes that. It's like a way to protect yourself from the pain that's coming. So that doesn't surprise me at all. So I want to know what prison was like for you. And what I mean by that is I'm not looking for salacious stuff or joining gangs or the violence, any of that. What I'm wondering is, as somebody who grew up around professionals, and you said a hard work ethic, a good work ethic that you had, what struck you about the work ethic, for instance, of the guards, the counselors, the lieutenants, the wardens? Was it shocking to you, anything about their behavior, not just their work ethic, but their professionalism?
I think that my prison story is always more fascinating than the story that got me to prison, which is interesting in itself. And I think my prison story really sheds light on everything that's wrong with the criminal justice system. Now, I'm a white kid from the suburbs that's raised well, taught to believe that counselors in high school are there to help you get into the best colleges. So obviously in your mind, when you hear the word counselor or case manager, when you get to a prison, they're there for you. And I just remember being so excited to meet, because you don't meet with them on the first day. there's like a waiting period. It's like 2 weeks to see your counselor. In some cases, you don't even see the counselor because they already assigned your bunk and everything's on sheets. And, unless there's like an accident or a quarrel. And my first instance was when I got ordered to go to GED. And I go to my counselor and she's barely even looking at me. And I said, hey, I have my high school diploma. There's a mess up here. And they said, well, according to this, you don't. So you're going to GED class or you're going the shoe. And my points were jacked high, so I had to go to a low because I didn't have my diploma. So what they said, but there was just something wrong in the paperwork or something. I graduated high school. I had the diploma. And that was my first instance with the counselor. I kept trying to get answers. And they were like, well, you'll meet with your case manager in 30 days. And it's a long 30 days meeting with that case manager, and they won't see you before. When you first meet with them, they call it team. They'll say, yeah, we'll see you at your 30-day mark. They have up to 30 days, and it's normally on the 30th day that they actually see you. And I had a lot of questions, like, why aren't I at a camp? My lawyer said I would be at a camp. It doesn't make sense. I have no criminal record. I'm here with all these, like, violent offenders or sex offenders. Why am I here? And this, to answer your question perfectly of how they operate, is as soon as I walked in there, he barely looked at me. And then when he looks up at me after I'm talking and introducing myself, he looks at me and he says, you're going to have a hard time here. And I'm going through my mind like, what do you mean I'm going to have a hard time? And he says, I'm one of those, referring to a sex offender, which everyone the month prior had been treating me as because I didn't have my paperwork because no one told me about paperwork. And little did I know that in the feds, if you're young and white, and just white in general, but especially young, no one's there for fraud that young. And the sex offenders that are older lie and say they're there for fraud. So they just labeled me as a sex offender off the bat. Had I said I was there for guns or drugs, that would have been a little bit more believable. But because I said I was there for financial crimes and I went to trial, no one believed me until I got the paperwork, until people Googled me on, contraband cell phones. But the fact that that case manager says that to me, that says it all right there about the staff. A lot of the staff are lazy. They want to do the bare minimum. That these facilities are understaffed. I thought it was wild that you're in this building with over 400 inmates. There's no cameras anywhere in this building. It's like the streets, Anything could happen. There's just one guard who sits in his office. If you have a decent guard, he'll sit in his office the whole shift and just walk and jiggle the keys. And then obviously you have some super cops, but the super cops still treat the inmates like shit anyways, They're just there on their own agenda or to get bonuses for popping contraband, But that's the system. That's the federal system. It's not designed to help anyone. And I was shocked with how, one, a lot of the classes that they offered were taught by other inmates who were the most, unqualified people ever. They were not people from the street, except if you were in the GED class, And granted, there were some inmates who had been in prison for a long time. I'm sure, you found yourself years later that were teaching classes that at least had the decency or education by that point to teach. But some of these guys were just way off the mark, not properly educated, should not be teaching classes. And the only professional instructors they had were for the GED class, where the only reason why people were there was because you'd be penalized if you didn't show up. So that was kind of the system. And the electives and the programs, there was no incentive to do that. Obviously, Donald Trump changed that in the when he passed the CARES Act. There was more incentive in the federal system, but there wasn't while I was there. There was no reason to program. There was no reason to do anything. And the staff didn't care about you. And then, going towards my release, I was thought that I'd get put in. I was eligible for, max halfway house, max everything. They didn't care. They just put it in the system. They didn't fight for you. They're like, 2 months, 3 months, 2.5 months, here you go. And, they didn't care is the biggest part. They're so laid back.
A relatively famous economist said to me recently, he's the host of the Soho Forum debates in New York, Gene Epstein. He says, well, we both know Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. I said, hey, I don't know any such thing, because all the reasons given to me for why he couldn't do it, I know are BS, right? I have no problem believing there's broken cameras, cops not paying attention, sleeping on the job. None of that would surprise me, and I don't think it would surprise anybody else. I mean, would that surprise you? I'm not asking you to give your opinion on whether he killed himself or not, but would it surprise you if he was able to?
I was in the opposite building that he was in before they closed MCC. I was in MDC, which resembles MCC, and seeing how they operate there, and especially being in the shoe by myself, like before, it's very possible he killed himself. I doubt they didn't take away, they're not going to take away blankets. So for him to cut a sheet and hang himself is very possible off of one of those bunk beds. And it doesn't surprise me that I think, and that goes to, maybe it's not necessarily the officer's fault, but it's the system's fault because, a perfect example is when I was in the shoe, you get very closely.
Okay, I hate to interrupt you,
Yeah.
and I do, but you've said shoe several times, and I
Yeah.
got to ask you what it is.
So it's a special housing unit.
Okay.
That's like solitary.
Okay,
in
so
the feds.
segregation,
Yeah,
basically.
segregation.
Okay.
When I was there, you get very friendly with the guards, and you would see the guards, you would know their shifts because they were the same ones for the quarter. And it would be at the end of the shift, and they would be saying they're going home, we'll see you tomorrow. And then when count time happens, when the shift change, after that, you would see that same guard walking through, and you'd ask what happened, and they'd say, I was out the door and I got mandated to stay. I don't know how it works on the state level, but in the feds, if you're told you have to stay for overtime, you're mandated. So it's very possible that those guards that night were mandated to stay overtime, and they fell asleep. It's the middle of the night at 2 a.m. They didn't do their rounds. And you got to realize count time, yes, they do those mandated counts, but that's not necessarily a requirement to do a walkthrough. It is, but it isn't. It's not like it's an actual count. So there's a big window from the 12 a.m. count to the 4 a.m. count where, that could have happened, and it's totally believable. That's why they have suicide cells in these, prisons, because inmates do that. And he's a guy that's looking at life in prison on sex charges where inmates are probably berating him, and that's why they're going to make sure that Diddy doesn't do that. They probably have around the clock coverage, but it's very possible. I felt suicidal in there. You're claustrophobic and in solitary, that would kill anyone, honestly. If I didn't have an out date and knew that this is going to pass, if I'm looking at life in prison, I'd have similar thoughts.
Yeah, in Connecticut, when I was at McDougal, they have buttons that they're supposed to push when they do their tours. And what they'll do is they just go press the button. They don't necessarily look in all the cells. So, yeah, I'm 100% with you. It doesn't surprise me at all. Now, you mentioned classes. Are you referring to rehabilitation programs? Are you putting them together with classes when you talk about them?
I don't think we had rehabilitation programs. I remember there was like art classes, there was business classes, there was music classes, all taught by inmates that would volunteer. Like I could have signed up to teach a class. They'd put that in the beginning of every quarter, and you can run your own class. The only professionals from outside that they had in there was to teach the GED class. They did offer a college class because my family members would be like, why don't you do the college thing? And it doesn't really exist. It's all smoke and mirrors, They'll give you a packet to apply that's outdated for probably 15 years ago. It's all fake, It doesn't exactly, there was no college classes there,
Yeah.
I hear these success stories of people getting their college degree and stuff. Yeah, probably on the state where they're following that, but not in the feds, at least not in any of the facilities as I was in.
So the stated purpose of corrections in America is incapacitation, punishment, deterrence, rehabilitation. My contention is that by and large, all they do is incapacitate. Because if you want to go to prison, now obviously being deprived of your liberty in and of itself is a punishment. Got it. But the conditions are such that if you want to just go and dick around and play games and watch TV and whatever else, you can do that. Guys, for the most part, live in prison like they did on the street without women and, without the freedom. But their mentality and the basic activities are largely the same. And if you're not facing any punishment, then there's really no deterrent, especially if you're a hardened criminal, people I don't think grasp the effort it takes to change. So you have to really be put up against it, right, to get you to do that type of work. So you're not being punished, you're not being deterred, and nothing is there to really rehabilitate you. I mean, they will have all kinds of, high-sounding programs and whatnot, but what I would tell people, like when I looked at the Connecticut DOC's mission statement and code of ethics and all that, is, yeah, that's great, but if you look at the menu, they have something on the menu called Chicken a la King. right? It sounds great. If you look at the menu, you're like, wow, these guys are eating, man. But then go look at what it actually is, and that's what their directives are to me. It's the equivalent of turkey a la king and chicken a la king on the menu. So what are your thoughts on that? Is my depiction accurate? Because I've only been in Connecticut prisons. I've never been in the feds.
No, it's completely accurate. And even on the feds, you could get girls. Like at the camps, we were leaving to guys were. I didn't have anyone in Wisconsin, but to like come visit. Really, my dad visited one weekend, but guys would escape and run through the woods, go hook up with their wives at the local motel, and run back before count time. That would happen, and then you have all the corrupt guards that are hooking up with inmates. You don't know how many guys are in the SHU under investigation. And 9 times out of 10, they were all true because there was rumors floating around that they hooked up with the case manager or a correctional officer. They just didn't get caught red-handed doing it, but they did it, and the guys brag about it and stuff. And I don't think that reflects poorly on the inmate. He's put in that environment, and he's going to do what he's got to do to survive. But it's the system in general that makes all these holes in it. Why is there if there's so many contraband cell phones in it, make them legal in the prison? You know, and restrict their access. You're spending all these resources cracking down on phones and doing all these things. It's like there's zero focus on rehabilitation. It's just punishment. It's just, whatever. And I think a lot of the violence and everything that comes from it is because there's not those types of things. And you have the shot callers and the gang leaders that are sitting there that if they have any type of money on the street, they don't have to lift a finger. They could sit there and get fat eating their burrito bowls or whatever, watching TV, buying seats, because you could buy anything. For $30 a month, I was able to not have a job. I just paid one of the guys that would do my job. I had a no-show job. It's like the mob, in prison. You could do whatever you want. You really can. If you have a little bit of money, because $100 or $200 a week in there is millions out here on the street, you could do whatever you want and not have to lift a dime. Guys would have their laundry. I would have had my laundry folded. I had, my room clean. I had everything taken care of for me. I had a cell phone, and I'm not learning anything. The only good thing that prison did for me was got me in shape. I lost weight, but it didn't change my mindset. My mindset changed going out on my own and doing things and working a regular job. That's why I love the correctional facilities I visit that do the work release program. They're making guys work. They go out, they earn a living, they keep 75% of their income, and they're able to spend that to send their kids Christmas gifts or take care of their family. They're still in prison for a crime, but they're working. They're being a contributing member of society. I would have loved to be able to work. If I'm at a camp, right, why couldn't I work? I'm at low custody, and I could literally walk anywhere, if I wanted to escape or whatever. How come there's not some type of work program? Why isn't there anything like that? And that's where the feds get it wrong compared to the state, because they don't have those work release type programs.
So how much time did you end up doing?
I did about 28 out of the 36. I think I did 29 months, went to a halfway house, that's a whole nother ball game. You're mixed with the state. About probably Connecticut halfway houses. I was in the Waterbury one, the Chase Center, which you want to talk about for-profit entities that don't give two shits. If, God forbid, I ever had to do this all over again, I would say keep me in prison, because that's even better than the halfway house. They want to jam you on the pettiest thing, and you're out of prison, and there's no correlation between state and feds. You could be in the same facility, but you had to have a flip phone. It's 2019. How come the state guys get a smartphone, but we had to have flip phones? And they just treat you like garbage, and they're people that are just there, that are working there as an intermediary to get there fresh out of college. They're younger than you. Imagine you're out of this prison after 25 years. You're excited to get a job and all of this, and you have a 19-year-old who's in college telling you you can't get a pass because X, Y, and Z happened, when all you want to do is go get a job after serving this time. That's what those facilities are. So I did, about 29 months and a few months in the halfway house, and then I did a home confinement for a year.
So at some point you decide you're going to do the podcast. So first of all, what is the podcast about, and what is your purpose in doing it?
So I worked at actually Whole Foods for 4 years when I got out.
Wow.
A lot of the guys that get into this line of work start right when they get out. But I got out in 2019 went through COVID, did all that. And I tell everyone that, I talk to that's kind of struggling after prison, I said, get a normal job. So many people have these big egos about, they were a kingpin or a drug dealer or any of these things. And they're struggling now because they're not getting that fast money and they want the next hustle, the next entrepreneur thing. They want to be a big podcaster. And I just tell people the best thing that I could have ever done was work that normal job. I worked my way up as a hot bar cook, bottom of the barrel, washing dishes some days, just grinding, $15 an hour up to a prepared foods team leader making $33 an hour. And I was going to make over $100,000 my last year doing it with overtime. I opened up stores with them. I did all of these cool things, worked my way up. I was on track to be a store manager, making $250,000 a year. And it was a great experience. Got health insurance, got a car for the first time, got credit, got a dog, all of these great things. And I just grinded and it kept me out of trouble. And that got me through my probation system part. And I feel like a lot less guys would violate if they had that kind of mentality while on supervised release and probation. And it wasn't until my friend convinced me on that last year when I was kind of getting burnt out from corporate because they promote the wrong people and they don't really acknowledge the hardest workers. And he said, Ian, start sharing your story on social media. And what happened was my 5th video, for the first time ever in 4 years, because I didn't talk about prison to anyone, didn't talk about it with my family, but I was always a black sheep. Like when I was out and about, people knew me, or people at work would be like, oh, that's a guy that went to prison. I would not talk about it at all because that's what society makes about people that went to prison. And so he convinces me, and I make this TikTok about spending 6 months in solitary, how I lost all this weight, how you have to, take a shower in another cell, all of these things. And it went viral. And this was 2022 in August. And ever since then, I've never missed a day of posting. And, I started to gain a following. And a few months later, I started the podcast. And at first, I was just interviewing other prison TikTokers or prison or YouTubers that went to prison that had big followings. But eventually, I realized there was a market for just average individuals who have been affected by the criminal justice system, and it would later expand to law enforcement, crime victims, attorneys, but who would never get invited on your typical A-list news segments like a Fox or a CBS or CNN or 60 Minutes. None of them would ever invite them. They were small, time people that have been affected, because millions are affected by the system, or millions have worked in law enforcement, and they have crappy articles written about them from something that happened in their past, but they have turned their life around. So I sit down with these individuals, I go through their life story, and we always wrap with, what they've learned from it and what they do now. And the majority of these cases, they're success stories. And I kind of realized my purpose was to give these opportunities, people that don't normally get a voice, an opportunity to have a voice and be seen and be heard in a safe, comfortable spot to share their story and their experience. And it's cool when people search their names now, the negative articles aren't what pops up. It's their interviews with me that pop up. And these are people from all over the country that come in and share their story from all aspects of the criminal justice system. And it's therapeutic for them. They have a safe place to talk. And it's basically like, entertainment in a way, but it's also inspirational. Where, there's your flashy stories of what they did in prison or their crime, but it's always these people have turned their life around. And that's so inspiring to maybe someone that is going through a relationship issue or a job loss or weight issues. And they look at someone that was, born into a drug addicted family. Their mom was giving them heroin at 9 years old, gets 10 years in prison for selling drugs, consumed by all of this violence or drugs or whatever and crime, gets out of prison and then is able, in a lot of cases, like we look at Carlos, we look at yourself, was able to turn their prison hustle into a successful business after. And so that's what we showcase in these stories and how they've learned and the change they've made. And that's what I realized was my purpose. And I've just been doing that ever since.
I couldn't do what you do. And I'll tell you why. I really don't watch many podcasts at all, to be honest with you. But I do catch you on TikTok. And I could not have ex-cons talking to me without calling them on bullshit over and over and over again. It's just I've trained myself to do it. I do it in my own mind to myself if I'm being dishonest with myself or anything. So I saw one guy come on your show, and a lot of them, they talk about, and there was this child molester in there. And it's all bullshit. Like they make prison seem like it's something that it's not, right? Just to be clear, I've seen child molesters in prison get picked on. When they're a 5'5", 140-pound white guy, yes, guys will say things to him and pick on him. But to a man, every sex offender I've ever known that could fight didn't have any problems at all. And there's always the guys who will say stuff like, yeah, look at this, all these child molesters walking around because nobody does anything about it. And I had a cellmate once who said that to me. Look at all these snitches and rippers are running around and no one does anything about it. And I said, well, you're not doing anything about it either because I don't care. So I'm not going to go do something about it if it's not bothering me. But it seems to me if it bothers you, you ought to be the one that does that. And granted, I haven't watched a lot of your shows, but I do know criminals. And my guess is that you've got a lot of guys that come on and they talk about the prison code, which is complete horseshit. It doesn't exist. The no snitch code, it's all bullshit. And I just wonder, because you're a smart guy, and 3 years in prison is enough for you to realize what I'm saying is accurate. And I just wonder when you hear that kind of stuff, is it just enough to you to give them that safe space to get stuff off their chest? And that's why it doesn't bother you? Like, how do you deal with that, I guess, when you're interviewing guys? And it's not just inmates, it's the COs too. Because COs have an interest in perpetrating an image of prison as if it's this Vietnam war zone that you're in. Because then they can say, look how dangerous our job is, we need more pay, right? So when they're sitting across from you and you know that you're being bullshitted, how do you deal with that?
I think my interview style is letting them hang themselves because they're going to get written up in the comments. I've had plenty, the guys that you're describing, if you look at their comments, I would bet money that they have been called out for it. Or someone will do research and they've been proven to not have that much prison time. But it's not my place to get argumentative and combative. It's my place to give them a story, because if I told you my story without no internet exists, nothing, there's a 9 out of 10 chance that you will not believe that story. I mean, an 18-year-old owns a nightclub, books the biggest acts in the world. Is that really believable?
I would have believed it. What I wouldn't have believed is that was your first crime, or that was the first incident that was indicative of your criminal behavior. Everything that you've told me today is completely in line with what I know about criminals. You want to be the big shot. You want everybody to like you. You want to be impressive. You think that you're untouchable, not going to get caught. That's super optimism, false sense of uniqueness. So all of that stuff doesn't surprise me in the least. I get why some people might not believe it, because another thing that criminals do, like I said, is lie. They'll puff themselves up as if they're bigger than they are. But I know Danbury, Connecticut. I know Danbury, Connecticut is rich people. So if somebody tells me, hey, this rich white kid from Danbury, Connecticut got in trouble, he was running a club and he ended up in trouble for embezzlement or wire fraud, whatever, I wouldn't have an issue with believing it. Like I said, I would have an issue believing it was your first crime or it was your first time in trouble.
And most people, when I tell those stories, don't believe it was possible to own a nightclub. And a lot of it's based on you don't get all the facts in one story. They didn't realize I didn't have a liquor license, because they would say this story's bullshit because a teenager can't have a liquor license, which is very true, but I'd never had a liquor license. So there's situations like that. So I do have a lot of people that come in boasting about who they know and their connections and this and that. And I also realized I was that person too at one point when I owned the club and, all of that. I was very cocky, and now I'm just very chill. I'm very patient. Everything will happen the way it's going to happen. I'll meet people the way it's going to meet people. I don't push people to connect me to whoever they might know. But I get that all the time, and especially you see that with a lot of these grown people that are still pursuing the rap game or music, and there's no shade to them. That's their hustle. That's what they want to do. But I've seen that for so long. You see that when I was working in the entertainment business, and I saw that when I was in prison, and I see that in the business I'm in now, So that I could see right through. Like, there's no way you just got off probation, you have 5 kids, and you're a professional rapper. It doesn't happen. Granted, there are some very successful, but there's some that are not successful, and I know you're selling drugs on the side, or I know this and that. Like that, I could see right through. But again, it's not my place to call these people out, because that breaks the integrity of it, because there's so many interviews out there that get argumentative. So I leave it up for the audience to decide, do you want to believe this person or not? And in a way, it's kind of like a lot of news stations, because there's a lot of bullshit that gets put out on the news.
Sure.
No matter what political side you're on, there is some stuff that's just not true. We see that all the time in politics. And then people will repost that on social media. They'll call people out. They'll form opinions, you know? You don't see the news people, maybe in some cases, but in most cases, from what I've seen, they don't say to that person, oh, that's a blatant lie, you know, yada, yada, and get combative on it. In some cases they do, but in some cases they don't. So that's kind of my stance on it.
I think that a lot of that has to do with personality. Like you have a far more chill personality than what I.
But that's why it works for you. That's why you've carved your own a niche, and that's what holds your values to you. Me, I'm chill, and that's just the demeanor I'm in. I'm not a confrontational person. People can confront me in questions, like you asked me before we start if there's anything that's off limits and stuff. I have no problem being the person on the receiving end of that, you know, because I've been in that position when you're getting questioned by the FBI or the judge or lawyers, you know, I've been there, but you know, it's just different, you know, it's different for everyone. So I understand both sides. I'm more patient and reflective and thinking about things in that way. And I also know not to let myself get hung by certain things or get, you know, trapped on anything like that too. And also it helps me too that all my dirty laundry's out there and I can stand by, like I went to trial. Like I'm in a great position because I went to trial because literally everything's there.
Yeah.
Pictures, times, dates, everything. There's a lot of guys that take plea deals and a lot of that stuff gets swept under the rug.
So what does the future hold for Ian Bick?
I just want to keep growing this. Like this year I'm really focusing on like my health, like going to the gym in the morning, having, like I go on a walk with my dog who you met that last time. I go to the gym, I'm doing boxing or cardio fitness training 6 days a week, having that me time. And then I come into the studio, do a little work. I'm getting it to where I'm only doing 1 interview a day. This is like my last month where I'll have like 2 engagements like a day or sometimes 3. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm in a great spot where I don't need to stack it up. And the reason why I stacked it up, because people reach out and they get a little pushy. Hey, can you do it sooner? Can you do this? And I feel bad about it. And I feel like I'm letting them down because I'm a people pleaser. You know, I'll probably always be that way. But now I'm like, listen, I have so many episodes in the tank. This can wait. You know, yeah, they have a great story and someone else might get the story before, but I have my platform and my way of interviewing. So if they're going on so-and-so show before me, so be it. That it is what it is. And I will see you in the 2 months or 3 months it'll take for you to get out here. I'm not traveling as much. I burnt myself the crap out doing all these traveling with the podcast and this and that. Now when I travel, I'm not booking other things and double booking, and I'm taking a day to recuperate after. And I'm trying to really hard to do like the no phone before bed for a half hour to an hour, you know, just for the light, and get my 8 hours of sleep and eat right. And, you know, just have people around me, have a close circle, and prioritize family and all that. So that's what I'm really focused on. And in between that is continue to grow the pod. And all I have to do for that is be present in my interviews and keep putting out the content. I'm at the point now where if I'm consistent, I'm just playing the long game. You're going to beat out a lot of people that aren't consistent. And you look at the biggest podcasters in the world, they did hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of episodes before they blew up to the level they're doing now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like Theo Von, I didn't hear of him till last year, but he's been doing it for years. You look at Rogan, similar thing, you know? You look at a lot of these celebrities that announce they're starting a podcast, they never make it past episode 10 because they're used to that instant reward from a movie deal or an influencer deal. And podcasting is just, it's a lot of work. You know what it is. You see what I do over here. It's a lot, especially when you're doing the editing and this and that. And I do it all myself. You know, I'm trying to get some people to help with booking and stuff and assistance in that regard. But the editing and all that, I do my own, and that's what makes it special. So I'm just really pacing myself and getting into a good routine and saying no a lot more. And that's kind of like defining my success and paying the restitution. I like to boast that I'm one of like the only fraud guys that are really paying a decent amount towards it, you know? And last year I paid, you know, almost 60 grand towards it. So awesome. I think in the next couple of years I can have that gone. And for me, that's my redemption. Because what can you say about me if everyone's paid back and made whole? That you lost money 10 years ago, but you did get it back. And I was a kid. So that's the way I kind of look at it.
So where can people find you?
Just ianbick.com, super simple. You know, I got everything linked there, the podcast, update new episodes there, and then my TikTok's Ian Bick, Instagram Ian Bick, YouTube's Ian Bick, but the website is the main thing. And if you want to come on the show, you could fill out the form there, and then we'll be right in touch with you to get you scheduled. And yeah, man.
Awesome. Ian, thank you so much for doing the show, and thank you so much for letting me use your recording studio. This has been great.
Of course, brother. Literally anytime. You might be a good interview. You might want to interview my dad, having like a parent on here. He's got a lot of interesting views, and he'll debate with you on stuff. And he'd be good for you. He's been on a couple of shows. He was on my show.
Was he?
Yeah, he was on my show, and he's an interesting guy. He's almost 80, so he's lived a lot, and he's had a really cool life. He used to cater for President Clinton, and he did a lot of cool stuff, and he's been supportive, and he saw this process. So having like a parent that went through that, and you can ask him about like, did you enable him? Did you do this? Like all of those things that you're looking for in me of why I am the way I am. I think it'd be a cool crossover to see it from the parent side.
It sounds like a great idea. Yeah. You got to connect us. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'll put you guys in a group text. But seriously, whenever you want this, it's free to use for you.
Awesome.
And it's here for you.
Ian, thank you so much.
Of course.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. Till next time.